Welcome to the second episode of On the Contrary. I'm Kayla Kurtz, Director of Sales at Closed Loop. And if this is your first time joining us, this is a venue where members of the Closed Loop team will get together to present with some heavy hitters from the digital marketing industry, some of our platform partners, and also some clients along the way, with a vibe that we're hoping is just a little bit different from what you're used to. Listen, we appreciate how much the digital marketing community bands together to determine what works and why. However, the digital landscape is continually changing, and we don't necessarily believe in staying the same course if the map is telling you to go a different way. In fact, we kind of believe it's our duty to think outside the box, play devil's advocate, or, as the name suggests, provide contrarian positions that could maybe unlock some truly exciting growth opportunities for brands. For this episode, we're going to help shift thinking as it relates to international growth and expansion. Many argue that specific regions require localized teams or agency representation in order to grow effectively. But we're going to argue that with the right tools and partnerships, it's more than possible to create sustainable growth while also building a more cohesive global strategy for your digital campaigns. This time around, we're splitting our conversation into two segments. First, I'll be chatting with a few fellow closed loopers about what they've experienced with international growth as it pertains to testing search and social in order to prove the value of international markets overall, with some extra notes related to how translation needs can be addressed successfully as well. And then in our second session, I'll meet with one of our key Google representatives and another member of the Closed Loop team who have worked together to help improve performance and grow international campaigns using Google's International Growth Agency program specifically. All right, let's get started. Let me first start by introducing my brilliant colleagues and fellow presenters for our first segment. I am joined by Greg Manfrey and Catherine Speltz, who are ad managers for the Closed Loop team, and also Madeline McConnell, who serves as a director level for us. With a combined experience in digital of about 17 years, these three are certainly bringing some unique perspectives to the table when it comes to developing international strategies for our clients and those that they've worked on previously. Since we're going to be focusing on Google later on, I'd love if the three of you could tell a story or two about maybe where your international expansion has appeared to be a more significant hurdle for a particular client, but you've been able to build sustainable growth with your work in either channels outside of search or platforms outside of Google. Madeline, I know you work quite a bit in the social realm. So typically budget restraints can be a pretty major challenge when it comes to considering international scale. How have you been able to combat that concern in some of your client work previously?
Expanding into international markets is not always as complex and difficult as we may think. We take the approach that each individual country needs to be split into its own individual campaign. However, just how we treat, North America, we can oftentimes treat the regions as a whole, and we typically will see better results just working off a larger pool of data. EMEA is one region that comes to mind in particular where we've seen a lot of success, and in some instances, it's been more successful when compared to North America. One thing that we've noticed is that in EMEA, business decisions are made at a faster pace recently compared to North America. So again, with the mindset of really pooling all of the countries together, we're able to make a better use of that budget. And we can pull insights from North America where we focus on similar audiences that are related to a specific skill or interest group. And that's really helped us drive and scale more MQLs and pipeline. And like I mentioned, in some instances, we see more success than North America in using that strategy. In APAC, we see that messaging and delivery of the message are extremely important. This is a region where we do see a lot of efficiency, especially on channels such as Twitter. Decision makers move at an extremely fast pace, and they're looking for opportunities where they can interact with the chat to make decisions. This seems that it's been much more widely accepted as a method of communication. And so again, when thinking about how we can make more use out of a smaller budget, in APAC, it's really looking to different ways that we can get that message across. And again, pooling those countries together where we can to get to that audience.
That's A very intriguing point, right? About sort of the difference in decision-making cycles. It's not necessarily a fact that I've heard, but it does make sense to me that you certainly then need to pace your pipeline and the pacing of your messaging differently. Greg, speak a little bit more to how you can leverage those target audience or demographic specifics in order to get the highest impact and value out of an international targeting set.
Yeah, for sure. I think the ICP information that you'll be using for your North America campaigns, they're largely going to fit almost anywhere. I think the difference that you're going to find is mostly within certain nuances like job titles, people involved in the buying committee, things like that. So you're going to want to use kind of the knowledge that you already have and temper it with a little bit of like even cultural research to make sure you're properly tailoring messaging. And to Madeline's point, that you're properly, studying the results of your campaigns. You want to make sure that in a country, so for example, in a country like Japan, you're going to have a much longer buying process with generally a much larger buying committee. And it's going to take a lot more time for that committee to come to a decision. So something like a 6-month sales cycle, when in North America it might be 2 months to 3 months, is something that I think you could typically see. So at the end of the day, making sure that you're tailoring your messaging just based off of what you're finding in your ICP segments and certain campaigns that you're using, making sure that, in some countries, emojis might work, in other countries, they might not. So I would say just using the information you have, tempering your expectations and measurement with a bit of cultural research and understanding, and like test your messaging to make sure that the messaging that you're sending to folks is the messaging that really is going to be good for them.
That's also an interesting point, Greg, right? So certain regions of the world, emojis can translate as something that does resonate and that does read well. Other regions, maybe not so much. And when you talk about international expansion, translations start to come up quite frequently in terms of being a hurdle, but they don't always have to be, right? But whether you're talking about a specific language for a region or even a dialect, there are some questions that I think clients will naturally bring up, and rightfully so, to ensure that their campaigns are going to have the same impact no matter where they're launching or where they're active. So Catherine, give us maybe some ideas or ways that we can work around those sort of translation questions or concerns to still find inroads for international, to maybe plead that case along the way.
We have a couple of third-party partners that we work with here at Closed Loop. I've also had some clients who have their own translation services that they use to start translating some of that copy. But I think a really important thing to consider is if you can get that initial translation through and kind of get it polished through your local team, we can really take that and run with it. I think something that clients sometimes have concerns about is like on the marketing side, like, can we really handle some of that international growth and that localized content? And it's really, if we can get like that translated content and those updated ads, like we can still run strategy and build out those campaigns like we can with any other focus, with any other goal that we're trying to do.
That's a very fair point, right? At the end of the day, there is still data that's driving so much of the output of what we are seeing from a digital perspective. So that does ultimately give us a point of truth. You also bring up things like collaborating with those field teams or those regionally specific teams as more of like a QA and teamwork sort of process. And I think especially when that is available, let's sort of break down those silos and work together between the agency and client side, or the advertiser and management sides. We wouldn't be Closed Loop if we didn't at least share some things that we had to learn along the way as well, right? So we didn't show up experts at this. So what are some things that the three of you would share with folks who are considering international expansion?
With international campaigns, this is really your opportunity to get creative and test and learn. Kind of as we talked about before, different areas respond to different formats. There is not really a one size fits all. So get creative. And I would really encourage you to, with the budget you have, test and learn as much as possible, expand into new ad formats, try new things. You'd really be surprised at, some of the efficiencies you would gain from that.
Really just thinking about like the user experience before you dive into some of this localized content. Like if you can update all of your ads, maybe like Greg was talking about in Japanese, but ultimately you're leading them to like an English landing page or an English product, like that's not the best user experience. And they might kind of get caught up in that, like, what's this company trying to do? And so I think really making sure that you have your bases covered, not only on the ad side, but really what is that product experience? What is that potentially sales experience for that users? And do you have every step along that way designed in a way that's going to set them up to succeed with your product?
Well, that's a pretty good transition for the vast majority of what we're going to talk about in our next segment with the Google team and how localization certainly plays into the strategy piece for this. Thank you very much for taking some time to put some of your thoughts and strategic minds together for the audience and share a little bit more of how they can use international as a part of their 2023 planning as well. And for segment 2, it's my pleasure to welcome Taylor Gray, International Growth Consultant on the Google team, and my work bestie, twin hamster, general digital marketing rock star, Megan Ray, who is Director of Digital Advertising here at Closed Loop, recently promoted. Thank you both for joining me. I really appreciate you making time for this. One of the reasons that I wanted to bring the two of you in particular together is because you've collaborated recently on a number of pretty successful client campaigns related to expansion into international markets. And a lot of that has been due to the partnership that Closed Loop and Google have together as a participant in the IGAP, or International Growth Agency Program. So Taylor, for those who may not be as familiar, could you elaborate just a little bit on what that program entails?
Of course, and just want to start by saying thanks for having me. Huge fan of On the Contrary, and really nice to see you guys as an agency tackling some really salient and not easy issues to talk through. So we'll try and be concise here. To start, to give you a little context about our IGAP program. About 5 years ago at Google, before IGAP was officially a program, we really prioritized building our internal capabilities, working with end customers to help them understand international opportunities and eventually capitalize on them. So through a lot of learning, we built a lot of tools, teams, trainings, and solutions, which ultimately enabled us to bring them to those advertisers. And like I said before, realize that growth for them. And then a couple years back, we realized, why don't we package this for really top agencies and scale our impact? So the goal today of IGAP is to bring agencies together and create this ecosystem that partners with Google to support businesses to grow internationally. So that's our mission today. And then through our partnership with Closed Loop, I've watched you guys just codify and solidify those abilities, like I said before, to use all of that and really leverage the full power of our program to deliver client growth opportunities. And of course, would be remiss to say that this is only possible through your guys' talent. And it's really great to have Megan here today, who's kind of helped spearhead the program internally at Closed Loop. So thanks for joining, Megan.
Of course. You make a really great point about this program in particular. So Google rolls out a lot of different opportunities on an annual basis or continually for agency partners or advertisers alike. But the international program truly does seem like it's been heavily focused on, and there's just so much to offer, and it's quite a mature set of solutions. Megan, maybe you can express a little bit about the aspects of IGAP that you found particularly helpful in helping you get over those hurdles when it comes to international expansion.
The problem most clients have when they're looking to expand internationally is all of the unknowns. What sort of demand is there? What markets have the biggest opportunities? What would cost pers look like? And then from an operational standpoint, what does it take to scale? So you'll typically have some US metrics you could maybe use to form baseline numbers, but each market is so unique that you're really comparing apples to oranges there. So being able to break through some of those unknowns with Taylor and his team using Google's opportunity identification tools has been a huge win for us in being able to determine benchmarks and headroom opportunity for a given market. Not only does that help support our overall strategy, but it can also help give the client some peace of mind to get additional buy-in with stakeholders. This also sets us up for long-term success when it comes to scaling, tapping into additional markets, because we know we're going into things with a more strategic, data-based approach, and we can think ahead on how we might be able to continue scaling those efforts. So being able to work with Taylor to generate those forecasts based on actual data has been a game changer.
I can imagine, yeah.
And then another issue we typically see come up a lot is concern over not having boots on the ground in international markets, which I think Taylor would absolutely agree is not true. And a lot of our clients actually don't have a physical presence in these markets. So we know that localization is the number one hurdle for most businesses expanding into new markets. 82% of consumers are more likely to purchase if the material is in their own language. So being able to utilize the iGap team's localization tools for things like keyword and ad copy translations or website audits takes a huge burden off the client and allows us as the agency to focus on areas where there's the biggest opportunity instead of being limited by where they might have resources.
What I'm definitely hearing is that it's a multifaceted partnership, but you're also getting value out of all those different segments, not just for ourselves. I think somewhat selfishly we can say as an agency, because it does give us that opportunity to tap into international expansion much faster and much easier. But to your point, Megan, it also helps us give that confidence to our clients or to advertisers so that they feel just as excited about that expansion as we are. And then, of course, measuring the performance is where the rubber meets the road and we make sure that it actually works. But so much of international expansion is in the research and development stages before launch even occurs in a lot of cases.
That's exactly right. And just to build off of that too, this program transcends just media and marketing, as we spoke about before with the operational component, specifically localization. So I've been really proud to see you guys take full advantage of the program, which again, beyond that building and opportunity finding and the media strategy, there's also that operational component to it, which is, again, how do you enter a new market and speak to the nuances of what that buyer, say in a B2B perspective, wants to see on a website. And you guys have been instrumental in, again, powering your clients with the full force of that program, which again, just transcends the media and marketing only aspect of things.
I think it leads to the right kind of results that clients hope to see if they're going to make these sort of international expansion bets, if you will. And I'd be remiss not to mention that some of this very hard work that you all have done together managed to get Closed Loop nominated recently for a Google Partners International Growth Award. We didn't win, but it is lovely to be nominated, and we'll get them next year. No big deal there. But I would love for the two of you to elaborate just a little bit on the markets that we focused on and what the strategy really was for that particular case study, and what you were able to make work when the client was maybe a little hesitant or not super sold on international initially.
To give you the full picture, the client is in the B2B SaaS space. And when we initially engaged in a broader international strategy discussion with them, they were minimally invested in only a handful of international markets. They knew that they had a lot of untapped market share within those current regions. And they also knew that they were leaving a lot on the table with markets that they had zero investment or exposure in. And it was no secret how incredibly well their international campaigns were performing. Granted, it was just branded keywords at the time, but even when you compare it to their US performance, which also had a very positive return on ad spend. So there was just a lot of curiosity to see what the opportunity was outside of the US. So expanding was a no-brainer. It was just a matter of where is the demand, where do we invest first, and how big can we go while maintaining a 2x ROAS goal, which is where Taylor comes in.
Thanks for the context. And it's a really important point. Where we start in all of this is understanding what is the client focused on. And for this client specifically, it was both growth, but also efficiency, having that high ROAS floor, as you just mentioned, and didn't have a lot of incremental budgets or really needed to understand the business case or what the opportunity is. And given the global state of markets, this is something that plagues a lot of advertisers. So it's really important that we narrow in on what are they focused on and what's in the realm of possibility as like a low-hanging fruit. So to kick off, what we needed to first do is understand their localization capabilities. And what I mean by this is in which languages did they have localized landing pages? What languages could their products support? And also what languages could their sales team service? As you can imagine, of course, you could launch in China and have Mandarin campaigns, but if you're driving to an English website, things are going to fall apart and it's going to perform really poorly. So once we understood what their current localization capabilities were, we started that market prioritization process. So what we did first was said in the languages that they could support today, which markets within their category had the highest forecasted demand during the time frame that they wanted to launch. So this allowed us to start with an initial list, again, focused on growth because growth was one of their top priorities. Once we got that broader list of here are the top growth markets, we double clicked into each to understand what does cost look like or what does CPCs look like to compare across markets, because again, we not only wanted high demand because they wanted growth, they wanted it efficiently. So where that left us was a more narrow stack rank of about 10 markets, I believe, when we initially went to them and said, here are 10 markets that you're not currently in. You could easily scale to with your existing localization capabilities, and there's pretty low competition. We also looked at query depth, which is a proxy for competition. Megan and I then went in, showed that sizing opportunity to them, and from that initial, I think it was 9 or 10 markets, Megan, they said, great, this is really going to help our business case. We don't have a lot of incremental budgets, but let's start by testing and proving out 2 of these so we can then go to our leadership team and say, we've tried these, we feel confident in the recommendations, and we want to move forward. So I think it was a matter of 3 weeks that they got the tests up and launching, and they were far exceeding that ROAS target that Megan mentioned before. And quickly, in a matter of, I think, a month later, they decided to expand to another 3 of those markets on that list that we had presented them. So at the end of the day, I think they went from having about 10 international markets, and I think they're currently in 16, which just speaks to, again, helping debunk the fallacies that Megan talked about before of, yes, we can start like with the low-hanging fruit of where can you scale and capture demand within existing capabilities, build that case out to help them secure the budget, do a test, improve results, and expand from there. So that was kind of where we stand today.
That's perfect. That's the golden ticket is this is what we believe can work, and then finding something to test to prove it out.
And that is all through, rosy-eyed glasses and distilling this in a really positive way. It was, of course, took a lot of different iterations and showing them different cuts and helping them feel really confident. So it, of course, takes a lot of collaboration and partnership. Yeah. And I think this is a really good example where Megan and I partnered and kind of helped to get over the hurdles that you talked about before of that worriness or uncertainty to really drive it in.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. So Megan, tell us about the results. I mean, that's obviously what we're here for. So how did the end of the output of those campaigns end up coming out as far as like conversion volume, that sort of thing?
Once everything was launched, our client did see a 58% increase in conversion volume. Wow. Along with that, there was a 23% decrease in cost per conversion, which normally when you scale, you can expect the cost pers to go up a little bit. But we actually saw a very nice decrease. And then they wound up with a whopping 339% ROAS, absolutely crushing their initial 200% ROAS goal.
Those are certainly impressive results. And I think it definitely speaks to the strength of the partnership here, not just between Closed Loop and Google, which is certainly very strong, but also with this particular client and earning their confidence. You did mention and touch on a little bit of the hesitations or the concerns that the client had about international expansion. And I want to expand that conversation just a little to and more overarching, where are clients saying, we don't think international can work for us? And your two teams are putting up the flag to say, we disagree. We actually think it can work. Talk through maybe some of those areas.
At the end of the day, a lot of clients are typically worried about the return while being able to scale easily. Obviously, they have limited additional resources available. So being able to identify the unknowns of which markets have the greatest potential to scale within the existing capabilities of the team while maintaining the high ROAS goal that specific client had, accounting for any churn, and then the unique factors of each market is the lowest hanging fruit because like this client, along with many others, they have limited resources available for localization. They don't have boots on the ground in terms of sales teams. So that's just another really big hurdle to overcome.
It's a big hurdle to overcome in their mind, right? And in the essence of this, on the contrary, being about debunking common fallacies, when we talked about this client, yes, we talked about the lowest hanging fruit, which is given your current assets and landing pages and sales teams, where could you service demand abroad without doing much else? Mm-hmm. It would be remiss to say, though, especially in tech B2B or within broadly like SaaS, it's not that hard to build a localized landing page in a new language, hire one or two sellers who can service that demand, and then translate those ads. Thankfully, if you're a client of Closed Loop, you have access to our translation team who can do that in 20 languages. But getting that up and running doesn't take that much time from a resource perspective, and it will often open up new pockets of demand. For example, for this client, Spanish was the next best opportunity to localize in, and that opened them up to 11% more demand globally. And this is a conversation that we're having of, yes, you're starting to tap out by way of current localization capabilities, but let's think like in the next year on your product roadmap, how hard would it be to build out a localized landing page and get some seller support? It's not that hard. And then there's a whole new pocket of opportunity to size and scale to with little effort. So yes, it's all about, like Megan said, what the client's goals are, what their capabilities are today to start with the lowest hanging fruit, but also thinking longer term and realizing that scaling, especially when you're not moving a physical product internationally, is quite easy to do.
Sure. Yeah, it's a great point.
Anything else, Megan, that we missed on? I loved the boots on the ground. Your agency has been so great at helping clients overcome that fallacy, and having the support of our Google team too has been helpful.
The opportunity that seems to get left on the table a lot when a client is hesitant or worried to tap into international markets, especially because most of the time there's less competition there. It can be a lot more efficient. Our results with this client that we've been chatting through, the cost pers have basically been cut in half in these international markets. So you're really kind of missing out on an opportunity to raise that ceiling on your current demand if you are shying away from international.
This also speaks to some of the concerns that many advertisers are running against domestically, is that costs are rising and things are becoming more expensive. As you just talked about, you start balancing in international and you actually see your costs decreasing and budgets becoming more efficient because you're tapping into those markets that maybe aren't seeing the same financial situation. I'm refusing to use the term crisis that we are seeing. So I think those are really great points, and they certainly bring up ideas for folks to be considering as they look at their 2023 planning schedules and say, well, hang on, let's look at our localization and what we have available, and let's really start to get after some of those markets that are on the simpler side of things. This was great. Thank you both again. I really appreciate it. I think you very much tapped into the purpose of On the Contrary, which is to say, No, we don't buy it. And we think with the right strategy, really anything can work for the right brands. So kudos to both of you for continuing to plead the case and do great work with international. And thank you, Taylor, also for the Google team continuing to develop this. I think that means a lot to us as agencies and as advertisers that there's a continued effort to help support these campaigns. So thank you.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
All right. Well, we certainly learned a lot in this episode. I am mentally exhausted, but also feeling really excited about some of these potential ideas and opportunities. First and foremost, and to reiterate the purpose behind On the Contrary, we're certainly not insinuating here that international or global expansion is the best next fit for every single brand out there. But what we do want to encourage our viewers to do is take a very deliberate step to ask, but could a specific region really make a lot of sense for us? Are we missing an opportunity to innovate? Where does our audience need to be engaging with us? Many of you are incredibly brilliant in your own right, but if you are looking for help in areas like international expansion or really anything related to paid search, paid social, display programmatic, or creative support of any kind, by all means, drop us a line, give us a shout, or whatever your regional turn of phrase is for call me. You can also follow the Closed Loop page over on LinkedIn and catch all of the fresh content that's coming out of our experts from the team here on a day-to-day basis. As always, it's been my pleasure to host all of you for this thing we call On the Contrary, and thank you to my fellow presenters for hopping in the ring with me. We'll see you next time.